Defining dyslexia. Dyslexia is of Greek origin, with dys meaning trouble with and lexia meaning words. So dyslexia literally translates into trouble with words. The International Dyslexia Association, or IDA, defines dyslexia as a specific learning disability that is neurological in origin. Neurological meaning that there are differences in the ways that people with dyslexia process written language in their brain. Dyslexia is characterized by difficulties with accurate and/or fluent word recognition and by poor spelling and decoding abilities. These difficulties typically result from a deficit in the phonological component of language. Phonological meaning an understanding of speech sounds that are fundamental to language. Dyslexia has nothing to do with the cognitive abilities of a student, and it occurs even within classrooms that implement high-quality reading instruction. Secondary consequences may include problems with reading comprehension and reduced reading experiences, which can impede the growth of vocabulary and background knowledge for students. Now is a great time for us to take a few moments to watch this TED Talk, What is Dyslexia? By Kelly Sandman Hurley. There are many myths out there regarding dyslexia. Let's take a moment to bust those myths and find the truth regarding dyslexia. The first common myth is that dyslexia means someone sees things backwards, like letters in reverse. In fact, dyslexia is a language-based disorder. Students' spelling may look jumbled at times, but this is not because they see or read words backwards. Rather, this is because students have trouble remembering letter symbols for sounds and letter patterns in words. This is definitely the biggest myth, which still commonly is believed among people in and out of the educational world. Myth number 2. If a student has dyslexia, this automatically means they have a lower level of intelligence. This is not true. In fact, dyslexia exists across all levels of intelligence, and oftentimes, the complete opposite is true. Students with dyslexia may even be gifted. Myth number 3. Students with dyslexia are unmotivated. Fact, dyslexia is not caused by a lack of motivation. Students with dyslexia are not unmotivated at all. They may appear to be this way, though, because they are hesitant to try at certain reading or writing tasks, or they may be avoiding them altogether. In reality, most students with dyslexia are extremely motivated and want to learn to read. They just need to be given the proper tools. Myth number 4. With treatment, dyslexia can be cured. Fact. Dyslexia is not a disease, and therefore there is no cure. With proper diagnosis, appropriate and timely instruction, hard work and support, individuals with dyslexia can find success in school and in later adult life. Let's take a look at a few more myths around dyslexia, and let's bust them. Myth: dyslexia is a standalone issue. Fact: many students with dyslexia also have ADD, ADHD, anxiety disorder, and/or depression. In fact, about 30% of students with dyslexia also have ADHD. Many times, students with dyslexia may have or develop anxiety or depression, which we will discuss in greater detail shortly. Our next myth is that English language learners cannot be diagnosed with dyslexia. In fact, dyslexia occurs across all cultures and languages. Myth: more boys are diagnosed with dyslexia than girls. Fact: dyslexia affects males and females nearly equally. Myth: dyslexia is not that common of a learning disability. Fact: dyslexia is the most prevalent learning disability. Let's take a look at just how common dyslexia is. 13% of the school population qualifies for special education services. Half of the population that qualifies for special education services qualifies due to a learning disability. 85% of those students who are designated LD have a primary disability in reading and language processing. But that's just looking at the special education population. Many people with dyslexia do not qualify for special education services at all. If we look at the population as a whole, about 15 to 20% of people demonstrate symptoms of dyslexia. In fact, dyslexia is the most common cause of reading, writing, and spelling difficulties. Let's take a look at some general signs and symptoms of dyslexia. These students are of average to superior intelligence, but they have difficulties in learning to read, spell, and express their thoughts in writing. These students might have trouble putting things in sequential order, recalling what they have read, listening to instructions, difficulty following directions, organizing their ideas, or expressing their thoughts clearly. Students with dyslexia may have issues with executive functioning, meaning the cognitive processes necessary for controlling and monitoring behavior. So they may have trouble with attention, planning, or working memory. These next slides highlight specific signs that a student may have dyslexia for various grade levels. I won't go into depth on each sign for each level, but will highlight a few key signs from each grade level. Your handouts contain additional grade-specific information, and I will send these slides to your principal in case you would like further reference. Signs in kindergarten. Trouble producing speech sounds. Difficulty recalling sounds of letters. Difficulty during phonics lessons altogether. And these students may be unable to break words into their separate speech sounds. So without even bringing letters into it, just focusing on the sound level, students may be having difficulty with segmenting and blending. For instance, hearing the word cat and being able to break the word up into its individual sounds, k, a, t. Or just the opposite, hearing the sounds k, a, t, and being able to blend those individual sounds together to say the word cat. Here are some additional signs for kindergarten, as well as ones that may occur in first grade. The key point that I would like to highlight here are difficulties with rhyming, matching words with the same first sound, deleting or changing individual sounds or parts from words. Continuing on, here are some signs that may occur in grades 2 to 3. Difficulty recalling sight words even after repeated practice. Poor spelling. Speech sounds omitted when speaking, reading, or spelling. Inaccurate and slow oral reading starts to emerge at these grade levels. An avoidance of reading and writing can also occur as early as 2nd and 3rd grade. Here are some signs that may occur for students in grades 4 to 6. Slow on oral reading fluency tests. Inaccurate reading of real and nonsense words. You may be wondering why nonsense words are important. Nonsense words allow for students to gain practice specifically with decoding and applying learned phonics skills, rather than relying on context and vocabulary knowledge to correctly guess at a word. Additionally, these students may start to have difficulties with reading comprehension, especially when compared to their listening comprehension. Continuing on, here are some signs for students in grades 7 through 8. At this point, students are likely to start becoming more and more overwhelmed by multiple assignments. They may lack effective strategies for studying and completing their assignments. Written work will remain a huge problem if unaddressed. Signs for students in high school include difficulty with comprehension. Comprehension and vocabulary are likely to have declined due to lack of practice, especially if students have become accustomed to avoiding reading and writing tasks. They may write poorly, and it may take a lot of effort to get their writing out. They may be in need of strategies for completing assignments and tasks, and they may be in need of study skills instruction as well. Let's take a moment to experience what it is like for a student with dyslexia to copy a passage from the board. Please copy the following paragraph with your non-dominant hand. You have 1 minute. All right, pens or pencils down. What were your takeaways from that exercise? How many of you were able to gain meaning from what you wrote down? For how many of you did this activity take a long time? Did any of you find it to be stressful? Did any of you consider it to take a lot of focus? How many of you wanted to just stop? Did any of you want to just give up? Those feelings are exactly what a lot of students with dyslexia feel every day when they come to school, even when doing something that you might deem so easy as copying words off of a board. As a result, these students can develop maladaptive coping strategies, such as avoiding reading and writing tasks, relying on other sources of information, becoming hostile or resistant to school, becoming depressed or antisocial. If students turn to these methods of dealing with their frustration, and if dyslexia continues to go unaddressed for these students, it may lead to anxiety around learning, school, and life, learned helplessness, avoidance behaviors, trouble with expression, feelings of inadequacy. If unaddressed, dyslexia can lead to failure to complete assignments, which can lead to grade retention. This might lead to reduced graduation rates or even dropout rates, as well as mental health issues such as depression and suicide attempts. These students need hope. They need to know that they are smart and special. They need someone like you. Students are more successful when early in their lives someone has been extremely supportive and encouraging, and when they have found an area in which they can succeed. Teachers can help create an incredible support system for students by listening and helping students express their feelings and their frustrations, by rewarding effort and progress over the final product, by being encouraging and helping students to set realistic, attainable goals, and celebrating students' progress towards these goals. Research shows that if a student with a learning disability has even one adult in their life who shows them that they believe in them, who shows them that they are capable, and who helps them identify what their gifts and strengths are, these students will be able to persevere and find success. We as teachers can also help by highlighting students' strengths. People who have dyslexia often have strengths such as thinking outside of the box, coming up with novel solutions to problems, being hands-on active learners, being creative and innovative thinkers, and people with dyslexia are often bright and very imaginative. Many people even see dyslexia as a gift, including famous doctors, athletes, actors, and musicians, people such as Steven Spielberg, Beethoven, Damon John from Shark Tank, Jennifer Aniston, Albert Einstein, and Tim Tebow all have dyslexia. And sharing with your students that these successful people who have dyslexia were able to overcome any difficulties related to their disability and find success in their fields can be extremely motivating and encouraging for your students. Let's talk about how students with dyslexia learn. Students with dyslexia learn best when presented with instruction through structured language. This means that instruction should be simultaneous and multisensory, systematic and cumulative, and direct. And we're going to take a closer look at each of these. Multisensory and simultaneous. Multisensory teaching links listening, speaking, reading, and writing. When all three sensory pathways, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, tactile, are used at the same time, the material is presented in a simultaneous, multisensory way, with strong channels reinforcing the weak. This type of instruction and practice creates new pathways in the brain, just as we saw in the video. It is research-based and is essential in interventions for students with dyslexia. Multisensory instruction can utilize kinesthetic activities such as skywriting, tapping out the syllables in words on a table, and tactile reinforcement activities such as using tracing sand or sandpaper for practicing letters and sight words. Systematic and cumulative. Intervention should follow a logical order of language, beginning with the easiest, most basic elements of language and progressing to more difficult material. If we think about where literacy lessons start in kindergarten, we usually start with letter sounds. From there, once those are mastered, we would move on to being able to blend those sounds together to read words, and so on. Material becomes gradually more complex after those initial skills are mastered. Intervention should follow the same logical order. So even if students seem to have memorized enough words to find relative success in school, they may still need to go back to the phoneme level to master foundational skills and build upon them from there, following a logical sequence. Instruction should also be direct. Do not assume that the student will learn any concept through inference alone. Content must always be explicitly taught. Guide learning through practice to independence, and provide continuous student-teacher interaction. One exposure is not enough. Students with dyslexia often need 40 or more exposures to gain mastery of a given literacy concept. Even if a student has demonstrated mastery on 1 or 2 occasions, review is necessary to ensure independent application of skills. This multisensory, systematic, direct instruction must address these 3 aspects of the reading code in order to improve student understanding of words and increase their reading and spelling skills. All good readers use the phonological code, orthographic code, and morphological code while reading. Again, with the phonological code relating to sounds, the orthographic code relating to patterns and rules for written language, and the morphological code relating to the parts of words that carry meaning. The phonological code, connecting the sounds in our language to print. Some ways that we can effectively address the phonological code include using letter pattern cards to systematically teach students to automatically connect sounds to letter patterns, teaching more patterns than the single letter sounds. The more common letter patterns a student recognizes automatically, the more easily he or she will be able to decode unknown words. This can be reinforced with activities such as visual drills of cards that contain consonants, vowels, digraphs, vowel teams, R-controlled vowels, welded sounds, and other letter patterns. The orthographic code, letter patterns in English. Some ways that we can effectively address the orthographic code include systematically and explicitly teaching spelling rules. For example, there are 2 ways to spell the ch sound, ch or tch, and there is a specific rule for when we use each spelling. We can also provide students with consistent opportunities to read aloud, and as they're reading, coach them through by asking them to identify learned digraphs, units, vowel teams, or spelling rules prior to tackling the word. The morphological code, understanding that pieces of words have meaning. In order to effectively address the morphological code, we can systematically teach prefixes and suffixes and refer to them when decoding and discussing vocabulary. We can teach Latin roots and Greek roots and practice generating words made of several roots. We can also involve students in word investigations, such as looking for interesting words in their reading and using their word knowledge to generate derivatives. The morphological code can be a key factor in improving vocabulary and comprehension. The following are examples of structured language programs which address the phonological, orthographic, and morphological codes of reading, while also being sure to include direct, systematic and cumulative, and multisensory and simultaneous instruction. These have been recommended by the International Dyslexia Association, and many of these programs are used at the Winston Center. Here are some recommendations for accommodations for students with dyslexia in the classroom. Seating arrangement. All students should be seated so that they face the board. Imagine the activity we did earlier, but with your back or side to the board. Writing. Students should be permitted to say a sentence or a spelling word aloud before they write it. Some students may prefer to whisper or even use a tool such as a whisper phone for this. Keyboarding. However, do not always assume that this is the easiest or preferred method for students with dyslexia to use for expression. It will depend on the student. For reading, students should be permitted to use recorded books as a scaffold. For spelling, students should be taught to use their ears to hear the sequence of sounds and to use their mind's eye to visualize words. They may also be taught skills such as finger spelling or using their fingers to segment the sounds that they hear in words prior to putting their pencil to paper. And finally, another accommodation for spelling and for reading is that very few words should be taught by sight or memory. Instead, the sounds and patterns in words should be the focus. Here are some specific accommodations for students with Section 504 plans. A reminder, Section 504 plans provide a student with accommodations without services. Extended time on tests, a designated note taker, use of multisensory instructional methods such as visual graphs and charts to accompany oral presentations, modified test delivery such as read aloud or allowing for oral response. Here are some recommended assistive technology tools. For audiobooks, Learning Ally, Bookshare, which is free, and Audible. For speech-to-text or text-to-speech, Prismo and Dragon Dictation. For visual mapping, Inspiration or Kidspiration. There are a lot of awesome apps out there that can provide students with dyslexia with additional support in reading and writing tasks. At this point, we will now transition into discussing ADHD. Let's start out by defining what ADHD is. ADHD is an abbreviation for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, sometimes referred to as Attention Deficit Disorder or ADD. It is a common disorder that impacts focus, self-control, and other skills important to daily life. These key skills are known as executive function. Executive function impacts the ability to focus, organize, and use working memory. According to Understood.org, about 3 to 5% of the school population demonstrate symptoms of ADHD. There are 3 types of ADHD. The first is ADHD predominantly inattentive type. This is characterized by distractibility and difficulty sustaining mental effort and attention. The next is ADHD predominantly hyperactive impulsive type. This is characterized by fidgeting with hands and feet, squirming in one's chair, acting as if driven by a motor, and interrupting and intruding upon others. The final type of ADHD is combined type, which meets both sets of inattention and hyperactive impulsive criteria. Let's take a moment to bust some myths about ADHD. The first myth is that ADHD just means a student is extremely hyper. This is false. In fact, ADHD can present itself in other ways. Students with the inattentive type of ADHD may appear to be off in their own world daydreaming. Students with this type may go undiagnosed because they are not the type of student that teachers or parents are majorly concerned with, unlike the hyperactive type, which could be more of a distraction in the classroom or at home. The second myth is that ADHD is a problem of laziness or low IQ in students. This is false. In fact, ADHD is caused by differences in brain anatomy and wiring. It often runs in families and is not the result of laziness. Just like with dyslexia, ADHD has nothing to do with IQ. The next myth is that students will grow out of ADHD eventually. This is false. In fact, many students who have ADHD will have symptoms that persist through adulthood, and many adults are even seen at the Winston Center. The final myth is that ADHD is a learning disability. In fact, ADHD is not a learning disability, but it can affect learning. Also, many students with ADHD may also have a learning disability such as dyslexia or auditory processing disorder. Nearly 50% of students with ADHD also have a learning disability. What might ADHD look like in the classroom? Here are some general signs and symptoms. Difficulty with following directions. Difficulty with regulating emotions. Trouble with thinking before saying or doing something. Difficulty with focusing on important, big picture information. Difficulty with time management or organization. Difficulty with starting tasks promptly. Trouble with keeping things in mind, working memory. And difficulty with shifting focus from one activity to the next. Again, thinking about those executive functions, the cognitive processes necessary for controlling and monitoring behavior. Here are some signs and symptoms of ADHD that can exist within students from preschool age to grade 2. Ignoring directions or doesn't follow them. Grabs things without permission. Gets easily or extremely frustrated. Needs to be frequently reminded to stop and listen. Needs multiple redirects or reminders. Has trouble getting started on tasks. Gets up, fidgets, or talks when expected to be quiet. Here are some signs and symptoms for students in grades 3 through 7. Seems daydreamy and distracted. Easily loses focus. Frequently loses or forgets things. Is often restless. Tends to forget to bring home assignments or to turn them in. Doesn't consider consequences before doing things. Doesn't finish tasks in a reasonable amount of time. Here are some common signs and symptoms for teens. Has trouble getting organized and prioritizing things. Often acts impulsively. Frequently fidgets and talks too much. Has trouble meeting deadlines and finishing tasks. Often needs to reread things or have directions repeated frequently. Often rushes through assignments, making many errors. Here are some ways that we can accommodate students with ADHD in the classroom. Increase space between student workspaces or desks. Provide footrests, seat cushions, or resistant bands around chair legs to satisfy the need for movement and increase focus. Give directions out loud and in writing using visuals frequently. Create a unique symbol between you and the student to help gain their attention. This could be a secret, discreet way to redirect them. Provide student with a graphic organizer or outline before a lesson. Monitor student frustration and take time to check in with them to understand their mood that day. Don't grade for neatness of work and give credit for work done instead of taking points away for incomplete or late assignments. Allow for more time on assignments and/or a quieter space to complete them. This slide contains additional resources in the event that you are interested in acquiring more information on dyslexia or ADHD. While all of these are recommended, there are two specifically that I will highlight now. DyslexiaIDA.org includes a 14-page booklet written for teachers with suggestions on how to address dyslexia in the classroom. And Understood.org contains a plethora of information on ADHD as well as resources on dyslexia. If you have any additional questions or would like additional resources, feel free to reach out to us at the Winston Center for Attention, Language, and Learning. You can visit our website at www.winstoncenter.com or call our main office at 509-465-1252.